Hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 91 of the Physician Assistant Exam Review Podcast. This week, we're going to be continuing down the GI track, finishing up with some odds and ends with food allergies and some nutritional disorders. I'm thrilled to have you aboard today. My name is Brian Wallace. I'm the founder and creator here at Physician Assistant Exam Review, where I help struggling and overwhelmed PA students dominate PA school and ultimately pass the PANCE and land their dream job. That's our goal, right? Is to get you into the job you've always wanted, into a place where you're helping people and feeling fulfilled. That's our goal here. If you get something out of today's show, please share it with a classmate or a friend. That does a lot to help me and to help them. So it's a double win for you. All right. So this week we have some odds and ends to wrap up with the GI tract as we move through the blueprint, which is what we do each and every session here, is we go through the blueprint and cover it in a way that is most going to help you retain the information and make it available to you on the day of your PANCE, right? My goal here in this particular show on this website with everything that I do is to get you to do the best you can as you get through PA school, put you in the best possible place to pass the PANCE, and then get you into your dream job. So what I do here is not always the most detailed. It's not always the most intricate explanations of things. What I do here is create a situation for you to remember the things that we cover, to build that durable knowledge so that you hold on to this information. And we'll get into that more as we go. So what I want to do today, though, is just hop right in and get started with our priming questions. The priming questions are a great way for us to get the brain engaged, to do a little bit of a warm-up exercise and see what you have inside your brain. A lot of times there's more in there than you think, and getting yourself to trust that a little bit is helpful. But even if there's nothing there, the exercise, the actual act of thinking and engaging your brain makes a tremendous difference as we go through the material and helps it to stick inside. So let's go ahead and get started with that. What small bowel biopsy finding is suggestive of celiac disease? What small bowel biopsy finding is suggestive of celiac disease? Define borborygmi. Define borborygmi. Yes, I had to look up how to pronounce that and make sure I was doing it right. It's not a word I've said in a long time. What is the most important piece of diagnosing a food allergy? When you're working up someone for a food allergy, what's the most important part of that workup? What BMI defines obesity? What BMI defines obesity? So today we're going to be covering food allergies, meaning gluten intolerance, lactose intolerance, nut allergies, which is kind of going to turn into just general food allergies. Very brief discussion of vitamins, and then we're going to finish up with obesity. As we hit the end of a particular section, you kind of have these, what I feel like are a little bit miscellaneous sections. So the wrap up here, it feels a little jagged to me, but you'll see as we go through, we're going to make the best of it. So food allergies, we're going to start with gluten intolerance, and it helps to know what gluten is, to have this stuck in your brain. Gluten is a protein found in some grains like wheat, barley, and rye. Can be found in lots of different places. Gluten sensitivity is different from celiac disease, which is a frank immune issue with gluten. You get a full-fledged immune response in celiac disease, and that occurs in 1 to 2% of patients. I'm sorry, not in patients, of the population, 1 to 2% of the population. We covered that in episode 85, and you can go back and listen to that if you want to get some more information and sort of compare and contrast the two. But the important thing for me that I got out of this section that got stuck in my brain and I want to share with you is that celiac disease, which I was kind of familiar with, affects 1 to 2% of the population. Gluten sensitivity or gluten intolerance affects somewhere between 0.5 and 13% of the population. That 13%, I know that's the high end of this range, but it's a huge, huge number. That's really dramatic. And the signs and symptoms of this are pretty vague and sort of difficult to identify, and there's not a lot of, you'll see as we go through this, not a lot of really good studies to determine if someone has a gluten intolerance. So as you go through this, think about for your clinical practice, it's not so hard for test taking because the signs, symptoms, everything's pretty straightforward. This is more for your clinical practice to think about, make sure that you have this in the back of your mind somewhere. If you have someone who's struggling and you can't come up with another answer, this certainly may be one way to look, but you have to keep it in your mind or you won't look for it. So a gluten intolerance does create an immune response, not as profound as celiac, and it does not create the damage to the villi in the small intestine that celiac does. So if you remember in a small bowel biopsy, you will see that damage to the villi. You know what else you'll see? Do you remember? You'll also see increased epithelial cells and crypt hyperplasia. Clinical presentation for a gluten intolerance. These are pretty straightforward for the most part, and I think you can hold on to them. Basically just GI problems, bloating, gas, abdominal pain, diarrhea, fatigue. Recurring headaches is one you might want to just stand out a little bit. Unexpected weight loss, muscle aches and pains. So this can also be confused with fibromyalgia. And then a dermatitis can go along with this as well. There are no good labs or studies to confirm this diagnosis, so a major key to this is going to be a good patient history. And then both a diagnostic test and a treatment is going to be eliminating gluten from the diet, right? So if you remove gluten from the diet, does the individual feel better? Do they get better? If it reduces symptoms, then you may have your diagnosis. Next, we have lactose intolerance or a lactase deficiency. Interesting. As I was writing this, I randomly heard on the radio yesterday someone talking about, I'm sorry, no, not on the radio. It's in a book I'm currently reading called The Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century. It's pretty interesting stuff. But anyway, they're as I wrote about lactose intolerance yesterday, I'm listening to this book and they were talking about how it, in the United States, for example, we treat it as a lactose intolerance, but really most people around the world, as you grow older, stop making lactase. The amount of lactase you create becomes much, much, much less. So most people are actually lactose intolerant, not necessarily in our culture in the United States. That isn't the majority, but around the globe it is. Just an interesting discussion, a wholly different point from where we're heading though. So let me just run through what a lactose intolerance is. Lactose is the carbohydrate found in dairy products, right? So obviously humans, mammals need that when they're very young because that's where most of our nutrition comes is from breast milk. So like I was saying, most mammals will lose the ability to create lactase as they get older. Lactase is the enzyme that breaks down lactose into glucose and galactose, which are the two molecules that put together make lactose. Sorry, I don't want to confuse you too much as I'm saying this out loud. So in auditory, this is a little difficult. I get that. So the carbohydrate we're talking about is lactose. That's the one found in dairy. It's made up of glucose and galactose. Lactase is the enzyme that breaks that down. Once it's broken down, the small intestine can absorb that, right, and get energy from it. We can directly use the glucose and we can transform the galactose into glucose. If we don't make lactase and we drink dairy products, the problem is the lactose isn't broken down. It's not split, so then it can't be absorbed, which really wouldn't be an issue if it just passed through. But what happens is when it gets to the large bowel, the bacteria in there absolutely love lactose. They're super excited to get it, and they can ferment it, which leads to diarrhea, bloating, flatulence, nausea, abdominal cramps, and excessive borborygmi. So it's just that carbohydrate doesn't get broken down and passes through, and the bacteria get at it and make all kinds of problems when they ferment it. Diagnosing this is going to, again, start with a good patient history. You have someone who comes in, think about how they're going to present, right? They're going to present saying they felt terrible, they're having diarrhea and bloating, and then it cleared out. So a good patient history is going to be really necessary, and you're going to have to go back through what may or may not have caused that. So some of this I find helpful to think about from a clinical perspective. Some of it doesn't work so well that way, and some of it does, as far as remembering. So I like to think about what the patient will look like walking in through the door. What's going to jar my memory to make me think, hey, maybe this is a lactose intolerance issue versus a torced ovary or something. Like, how do I separate those ideas as I'm sitting in the clinic? How do I go through that differential diagnosis of abdominal pain and get to lactose intolerance? A history is really going to help me here. And then you can do some labs and studies to sort of test this out. So number one is going to be a lactose challenge. So, excuse me. So you can measure the serum glucose and then give the patient oral lactose. Then you're going to do a couple of things, right? Then we're going to monitor for symptoms. So we're going to watch this person. If they start to have excessive flatulence, bloating, diarrhea, excessive borborygmi, all those signs, we have an indicator. Not a confirmed diagnosis, of course, but an indicator, a direction. On top of that, you can measure serum glucose at 1 and 2 hours after the patient consumes that lactose. Now, a person who can break down lactose and use it for fuel, what do you think happens to their serum glucose? Their serum glucose would go up, right? If you can break down lactose and you can use that fuel, your serum glucose should rise. If you can't break it down and it just passes through, there should be no effect on your serum glucose. So we're going to watch for symptoms and we're going to measure serum glucose. There's another test called the hydrogen breath test, which is kind of similar. You administer oral lactose, and then you measure expired hydrogen over the first 4 hours. A lactose intolerant patient will have elevated expired hydrogen, and that's from that fermenting process. Make sense? So, how do we treat it? Treatments here are pretty straightforward, right? Stop eating dairy. It's really not that complicated. Strict non-dairy diet. Nut allergies. I kind of transformed this a little bit. Nut allergies is on the blueprint, but I sort of shifted this idea a little just into food allergies in general. So clinical presentation is in a young child. Usually you get some atopic dermatitis, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. As children get older and become adults, the one description I found here that I really liked was explosive urticaria. Really like the way that sets that visual in your mind. Then syncope and anaphylaxis, obviously the worst case scenario. Labs and studies, again, a good history is the cornerstone here. You must get a good history for any of this stuff to make sense. A food diary is going to be really helpful when you're trying to parse out what allergies it is. You can get an allergen-specific serum IgE. There's skin testing. And then, again, we come back to the diagnostic tool as well as the treatment, eliminating foods from the diet. So you can eliminate whatever you think may be causing the problem and then slowly reintroduce things and see if you can, if the symptoms return. Antihistamines can be useful for calming down that allergic reaction, corticosteroids for very acute reactions, and then obviously we move to epinephrine for very severe reactions. This section also included a thing on vitamins. I kind of looked at it and went over it, and I didn't love where I was heading. I spent a while going through each and every vitamin and the different the different symptoms and problems with not getting enough of that vitamin, getting too much of that vitamin. And I realized, or at least my conclusion was, it was way too much information, way more than you would ever need to know. So I like to look at things and think, okay, if I'm studying for the PANCE, what are the chances I'm going to get a question on this topic? How many questions and how much time is it going to take me to learn it? In the case of vitamins, that ratio didn't work out well at all. It seemed like it was going to take a lot of time to sort through and then to memorize each different presentation. And then the treatments are slightly more complicated than just add or remove the vitamin. In some cases, quite a bit more complicated. So it didn't seem like the payoff would be worth it. I'm not saying it won't show up. It certainly might. I can only do this from the perspective of how I would treat these topics if I were preparing for my PANCE, if I were preparing for my PANRE, and what I did in the past. If you've been with me a while, you've heard me talk about whole sections that I don't study, whole topic areas that I don't cover. because I think the payoff, it just isn't worth the time. The confusion that goes into my brain isn't worth the time. Those are going to be different for everyone because some people remember some things better than others. So I hate to give very specific examples, but there are certain but I don't think I'm trying to think of how to say this without getting too much pushback and without people then complaining that I don't cover things. There are certain things that are harder for individuals to remember. There are certain things that are harder for groups to remember. That I think is apparent. And when we spend an exorbitant amount of time on things that have a very low likelihood of being more than one test question, it's a waste of time. The vitamin discussion sort of falls into that in this section for me, where I don't want to spend any more time on it here and confuse you and add in a whole nother layer of complexity. I will say that it gets covered in neurology, it gets covered in hematology. And I think in those instances, the information in those sections is important to know and very likely can come up on your tests and will come up on your tests. But to do a whole section on vitamins on its own in a GI section, I don't think is worth the time, energy, and confusion it can create. I hope that makes sense. And I hope you see where I'm heading there. I'm not saying you won't get vitamin questions on your PANCE. It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's possible, but it's unlikely and it's not worth the time. So if it's me, I'm not going to cover it. And so in this case, since this is my show and the way that I run things, I'm not going to cover it here. You can check out neurology or hematology to get a little bit more insight there. Our last subject for today is obesity. And this is kind of a tough topic to cover. Again, I don't love the way they kind of drop these miscellaneous topics at the end here. Obesity is a major, major problem, right? It is the leading cause of preventable death worldwide. It costs, I think I came across numbers in the US, just billions of dollars in healthcare costs. I know from my surgical practice how much more difficult surgeries become, how much more increased complications become on patients as BMI goes up. It is a huge, huge problem. Something we need to spend a lot more time on, and I think we could fix a lot of the issues in the healthcare system if we could solve or help people solve the obesity issue. And we seem to be heading in the wrong direction. Obesity is defined as a BMI greater than 30. We understand BMI is not a perfect number, not a perfect calculation, but it's a good place to start, right? It's a good indicator of what's going on. BMI greater than 35 is considered severe obesity, and a BMI greater than 45 is super obesity. As you know, obesity is correlated with cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, sleep apnea, cancer, osteoarthritis, cholelithiasis, cirrhosis, depression, and certainly a whole bunch of other things. Obviously, obesity is a multifactorial issue. There are all kinds of, let's say, causes or reasons it happens. You know, if you go through the literature and you read through, people who suffer childhood trauma are at increased risk for obesity. People with certain genetic types are at increased risk of obesity. And I appreciate all that information, but part of me thinks that it almost doesn't matter. You know, it's kind of like with my kids. I walk into the kitchen and there's a milk jug dumping out on the floor, literally just dumping out. And I look up and I'm like, we need to clean this up. And both my kids are standing there pointing at each other saying, it's his fault. And my answer is, I don't care whose fault it is. It doesn't matter. It's not relevant. Now, to some degree, will it matter down the road? Yes, and we should probably figure that out. But the immediate problem is stop the milk from dumping out on the floor. Pick up the jug and then clean up the milk. And then we can sort of work out the whys and the hows and whose fault it is and try to prevent it again. And I kind of feel similar about that in this discussion. When we call it a genetic issue, when we call this a emotional issue, all those things are true, but the answer is we really have to help our patients get through this and solve it. So if that information helps us solve the problem, then I'm all for it, and that's great. But if it provides an excuse or a reason why someone can't be or is in the situation they're in, then I'm completely against it. We have to have a way to help our patients change their diet and change their physical activity. That's how this gets solved. It gets solved by individuals adjusting their diets appropriately and increasing physical activity. So I just came across this morning, which is an article published in JAMA on a research project. It's titled Estimated Number of Deaths Prevented Through Increased Physical Activity Among U.S. Adults. And I'm not going to go into the details here, but essentially the study did was took 40 to 85-year-old individuals, tried to randomize it as much as they could, and looked at what 10 minutes of vigorous exercise a day would do. And what they came up with was that activity was associated with a prevention of 8% of total deaths per young men and 5.9% of total deaths among women. So in the discussion, they say, in this cohort study, we estimated that approximately 110,000 deaths per year could be prevented if U.S. adults aged 40 to 85 increased their exercise by 10 minutes per day. I mean, that's unbelievable, right? That's ridiculous. And it's one of the things that I came across on my own. I'm over 40, and I'm looking at my weight climbing just a little bit every year. I'm looking at my blood pressure climbing just a little bit every year. And I'm thinking, geez, at some point I'm going to have to go on meds. And I really don't want to have that happen. So this year, I changed up my diet. I changed up my activity. I went from maybe getting 30 minutes or so here or there. At one point I was running a good amount, then I hurt my knee, then I was doing some other things, and then this was a problem. I'm on a system now where for the past 130 days, I think it's about 130 days, I have been exercising every single day. I've missed 2 days in that 130 days. And what's happened during that time is I've dropped almost 20 pounds, but just as importantly, if not more importantly to me, was my blood pressure came back down into the normal range. To me, it was absolutely amazing to watch that happen as I increased my activity, changed my diet, and stuck with it for a long period of time. The change in my physical health. I have not gone back yet to do my lipid panel, but last couple of years, I've been right on the edge. Serum glucose at 100, 99, 100, 101. My cholesterol panels were not quite even as good as that. I'm really curious to go back. What is this, January? I have probably another month or two. I'll have lab work done, and I'm really curious to see what that looks like. And that's done without any medications, without any other interventions. 130 days of hard work and some change in my diet. And I want you to understand how that works. And I want you to see how that works. Because you're going to need to help your patients with that, and not dismiss them, but help them. So our treatment, when we talk about obesity, is going to be multifactorial. And it's going to take time. It's going to take energy from you. But if we can change a handful of people, we can show a dramatic effect in the world and in those individuals' lives. So again, our treatment here is changes in diet, changes in physical activity. And then lastly, we do have bariatric surgery. And I do have a little bit of bariatric surgery with a couple of surgeons. They have a fellow who works with them usually, but from time to time, he's either, he gets a vacation, she gets a vacation as well. So we will help them from time to time. And it's certainly gotten a whole lot better as they've moved to sleeves, which are have a whole lot less risk associated with them and work really, really well. So that's definitely an option for people, but it's a jump start. It helps people lose a ton of weight right away, but they still have to change their behaviors. They still have to change who they are. They have to change physical activity, and they have to change their diet on their own. That jump start is dramatically helpful, but it still takes a lot of work. So before we get to our answers for our primary questions, I want to just touch on one other thought before we go today. And it's the idea that growth takes a lot of work and a lot of struggle. whether we're talking about obesity, whether we're talking about your studies, to change and to grow takes a ton of work. It isn't easy. You can't stay where you were. You can't stay in your comfort zone. You can't stay on the couch where it's soft and warm and pleasant. You have to get out where it's hard, or there is no change. There is no growth. I went, over Martin Luther King weekend, went snowboarding with my kids, and they've gotten to be just where they can keep up with me now, which is a ton of fun. But I told them on the way up there that I expected them to fall a lot over the weekend. And of course, their question, like yours, is why would I, as their dad, hope that they fall? Well, the answer is because they're not getting better if they don't fall. They're not getting better if they don't try. They could stay at a nice slow pace, easy down the mountain, forever, for the rest of their lives. But why would you want to do that? I don't know. It's never seemed like the place to be for me. I know some people are content and happy where they are. I tend to not be. I try very hard to be content with what I have, but then still be reaching for the next thing. And if they're not falling down, they're not getting better. They're not working hard enough. They're not taking enough risks. And I think a lot of times in our society, we don't take enough risks. We're so worried about safety that we don't take enough risks. So then, of course, my oldest turned it around on me. And at the end of the first day, he said, "Dad, how many times did you fall today?" And I said, I didn't even come close to falling. And then I thought about it. What am I doing out here? Am I happy with where I am, or do I want to get better? So one of the best moments of the weekend was the following day when I normally ride goofy footed, which is left footed, and I was trying to ride regular, and I went down hard. I caught an edge and went slam to the ice, snow ice. And my 12-year-old looked back up the mountain at me and saw me and raised up his arms, because he knew that meant I was learning, I was growing, I was trying. But it's hard, right? Who wants to fall down? Who wants to get hurt? It's not fun, but you have to move out of your comfort zone. You have to move out of that space where you do what you've always done. And it's easy. Because some of you will find that the thing you've always done is be nervous for exams. The things you've always done is think that you're a bad test taker. The things that you've always done is think you have a bad memory. And even though those things aren't good for you, you're holding on to them rather than pressing through and growing through them. So take some time to think about, what is it that you're holding on to that's not helping you anymore? That isn't easy to grow through and move through, but that you can. All right, let's wrap up with our answers to our priming questions. What small bowel biopsy finding is suggestive of celiac disease? Small bowel biopsy findings suggestive of celiac disease. There are 3 of them, and I did mention them specifically very early on in the show. Atrophy of the villus, increased epithelial cells, and crypt hyperplasia. Define borborygmi. See how nicely I pronounce that? That's your bowel sounds. What is the most important piece of diagnosing a food allergy? Most important piece of diagnosing a food allergy? A good history. And lastly, what BMI defines obesity? What BMI defines obesity? Greater than 30. Great, that'll wrap up today's show. We have one more show left on GI. Before we move on to the next topic, I'm going to have to decide what that is. Don't know off the top of my head yet where we're going to head there. But I've got a lot of things cooking over at Physician Assistant Exam Review. You can get all the notes, obviously, on the website, www.physicianassistantexamreview.com. There you can also sign up for the website. For the emails. Email is where I reach out to you each and every day to give you tips, techniques, and methods for getting through PA school, improving your odds and your grades in PA school, passing your PANCE, and then finally and ultimately getting your dream job. We go through that stuff every single day. So if you're looking for some more helpful information, that's one place to go ahead and get it, is over on the website, and then just sign up for the email. And I think you'll be really excited about what you find in there. Also, the February issue of the Physician Assistant Exam Scholars newsletter goes to print on February 1st. You have a little bit of time to still get in on that. If you're on the website, you will find out, you will hear all about that moving forward. And that issue is all about studying, setting up a base for your studying, a platform, a launch pad for your studying so that you can have a really solid understanding of what knowledge is, where we're heading with it, how much of it you need to retain, how much of it, and how to hold on to more of it is really the goal for that issue, is to help you hold on to the information you need because it's repetitive, right? The medicine is repetitive. It stacks on itself. So the more you can hold on to, the less you have to learn down the road. And I'm going to show you how to do that in that February issue of the Physician Assistant Exam Scholars newsletter. So again, just head over to the website, sign up for the email address, and you'll see all about how to get on board for that. All right, great. This was a ton of fun for me today. Thank you so much for showing up. Again, if you got anything out of today's show, please share it with a friend. And I look forward to talking to you again next time. Take care.